Hey, I'm Liv and welcome back to my channel Endless Pages, and welcome to today's video, which are some book recs. Hello, thank you for watching this video. This is a book recommendation video. I feel like I don't do enough of these sit down like book rec videos, which is ironic since this is a booktube channel. Yeah, I don't know, I get in my head a little bit about how I talk about books and feel like I don't speak well about books enough to do recommendation videos, but I kind of had an idea. I've wanted to do this for a while. Where I talk about books that I feel like I don't talk enough about on this channel. I feel like I talk about the same 6 books all the time. So I wanted to highlight some books that I love that I either have talked about on the channel before but just not much, kind of been forgotten about, or books that I haven't had a chance to talk about on the channel, either because like one of them's been from a scrapped vlog, or it's from a month where I wasn't filming content, wasn't filming wrap up, so I just never got to talk to you guys about it. So long story short, I have 7 books here that I kind of want to give a bit of attention to on this channel, and books that I want more people to read. The first book rec is a book I read back in 2023. So I believe I did talk about it on my channel at some point, but I don't talk about it enough, and I really loved this book. I'm going to say that a lot in this video. I loved this book. This is a thriller. I want to say this was recommended by an old colleague of mine. We were having a discussion one shift, I think, about like isolated settings, like isolated claustrophobic kind of feelings in TV and books. And she was like, I've got the perfect recommendation. I just read this book. It's really good. And that book she recommended me, which was Breathless by Amy McCulloch. This is a thriller, like I said, like 2 or 3 times. We follow a journalist called Cecily, I think that's how you say her name, and Cecily gets this kind of once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to interview this world-famous mountaineer. So this mountaineer that she's going to interview is like really well famous. He's just recently done just like a like record-breaking kind of climb after climb after climb. I don't know how to say that better, but yeah, this is kind of like the last one, and he's like, yeah, you can come interview me, but like come onto the mountain, come with me, interview me on the climb. So this is kind of her last hope. She has blown a crap ton of money to go on this trip. Her life is kind of a mess, so this is kind of her last chance, and this could be the last chance of really making a career in journalism. So she really needs this interview to happen and to go well. So she agrees to go on the mountain, go on the climb, and then it's this world famous mountaineer, our journalist, and a few other kind of big personalities are going on this climb together. And once the climb begins up, I think it's like one of the world's biggest, tallest peak things. So once they start going up, someone dies in their crew, and then another person dies, and it's like someone is on the mountain trying to kill them off one by one. So like I said at the start, this book is so claustrophobic and such an isolated setting. You follow our main character trapped on a mountain, so you can't get more isolated than this, one of the tallest peaks in the world, and you are trapped with a potential killer. And this book was so tense. I loved the tension in this book. I really felt that claustrophobic feeling for the character. Like, it's so immersive and so atmospheric that I really felt while I was reading I was trapped on that mountain with that character. Like, you feel the tension. And what I also wanted to highlight that I loved about this book was yeah, the fact that you have not only the tension of a potential killer, but also like there's a tensity and the pressure on the body from that, but then there's the pressure of like what you're putting your body through. Like, this is one of a pretty risky thing, I think, at a pretty like not only mentally challenging but physical challenging aspect of the book is reaching the peak and surviving in these crazy conditions. So the tension also comes from the fact that you don't know whether the main character is correct and there is someone killing off the members of their climbing team, or is she going crazy from altitude sickness. So you really don't know which way it is, and I felt that I really flip-flopped in this book, not knowing whether she was just going crazy from altitude sickness or there was a killer on the mountain. I also loved the character development in this book. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I won't say much about what caused the growth, but our characters had a bad time in the past, and yeah, the things she accomplished in this book, story I should say, the things she accomplished in this story were just great, and I really felt like she saw what she was capable of, and I found that really inspiring. Even though it was in a thriller, I found her a little bit inspiring, and I loved her and what she overcame and the strength that she pulled to do a climb like this. So I found, like, even I'm talking about it like it's a non-fiction, it's a fiction, but yeah, I really loved this book. The tension was just, the tension was tensioning. It was so good. So if you're looking for an isolated like thriller, this is my recommendation because I loved it. It was so good. 5 out of 5 stars. The next book I want to talk about is probably the most interesting book I think on this list. Well, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but I don't believe I've ever really talked about this book on my channel before. The reason being was I was originally planning, maybe back in 2023, I can't remember exactly, I'm not quite sure, but I think it was 2023, I had an idea, probably not a very original one, where I wanted to read the shortlist for the Women's Prize for Fiction for that year, I think 2023. And I read this book for it and absolutely loved it, and I was like, oh, okay, maybe I can read, like, you know, reviewed and like award-winning books. But then most of the books are literary fiction, which is not my genre at all. I don't think it ever will be. So after attempting to read some of the other books on the list, I slumped and the vlog never saw the light of day. Typical me. So yeah, I've never really talked about this book, but I want to because it was a really interesting book. So I'll quickly tell you the plot and then give you a bit of a warning, content warning about this book. So this book is Pod. This is by Laleen. I think that's how you say that, Paul. And yeah, as I said, this was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. I don't believe it won, but it was shortlisted. So I don't really know what genre to call this. I really don't know what I would classify it as. So I'm just going to read all the Goodreads genres that are listed on the Goodreads page for this book. So Goodreads says it's fantasy, science fiction, contemporary, and they also say it's speculative fiction as well. So yeah, it's a bunch of those things. I really don't know what I would classify this book as. So this book follows the perspective of a female spinner dolphin called EA. I think that's how you say that, I don't know. And EA is expected to, at the age she is now, join in with her pod, which is like, I don't know how you describe that, like her family, her crew, I don't know, her like group of dolphins, rituals, but she is deaf, so she kind of struggles to join in and hear the, you know, the singing and the noises and all that kind of stuff that the dolphins make. Then this major event, I won't say what, spoilers, event happens in her pod. Something kind of goes wrong, and she really blames herself, and she decides to leave her pod because she's like so ashamed and blames herself for what happened. So we follow her on her own in this journey of being alone in the big wide ocean. And something that's also majorly happening in this book is that EA and other animals in this ocean are starting to, I guess, notice major changes that are happening in the ocean, and yeah, strange things are changing and happening and not as they should be. So we also follow the perspective of 2 other characters who I won't say why we follow them because I feel like it's better to just find out yourself and read without knowing. But I will say one perspective is a whale, and then we also follow a male dolphin as well. So while EA is kind of the main perspective, we also switch to those perspectives throughout the story as well. Before I go into talking more, the warning about this book, I just wanted to preface that this book is about dolphins while giving the warning, is that there is sexual assault, rape in this book. It's obviously dolphins, so it's not humans, but you know, it's the same thing, right? And although it is not overly descriptive, it is still quite upsetting to read, and obviously might be upsetting for some people. So I wanted to preface this at the start and let you know that that is content in this book. So yeah, I think this is one of the weirdest things that I have ever read in my life. Like, so weird. It took me a while to get over the fact that I was reading from the perspective of a dolphin, especially when there's like scenes of like dolphin sex and stuff. That was really weird for me to wrap my head around and be like, is that really what I'm reading right now? So I was really reluctant and really scared to go into this book, because I was like, wow, I'm gonna hate every second of this. And I was so surprised by what I ended up thinking about this book, and how thought-provoking this book was. So I was pleasantly surprised by my enjoyment of this book, and once I got wrapped my head around the fact that I was reading from the perspective of a dolphin, I was like, wow, this is such a clever way to talk about the topics that are talked about in this book. This book is big commentary on climate change, and the impact that this is having on animals. Like I said earlier, the animals are starting to notice changes in this book, and those changes are human-made changes, and yeah, human-made damage to different systems, and you know, animals are disappearing from the ocean. They're what do you call it when the animals move? When the animals move, what's it freaking called? Migration. Like, the migration patterns of the animals are changing because of effects of the climate. Food is going missing, so obviously the big overarching theme is climate change of this book, and I think that it's done in a really clever and thought-provoking way. This book, I still feel like, even though I've written notes, like I just can't do this book justice. So this book really highlights what a brutal and challenging life these animals live. Like, their whole life is about survival. It really brings to light, like, the animals are on constant alert for dangers around them. So they already have such a hard and challenging life just to stay alive, and pair that with these changes that are happening and completely throwing off the normal way of life for them. And the way they describe these animals, like, fear at these changes, because they're animals, they don't know what's causing these changes. Why is the food disappearing? They don't know that. And I think paired with the descriptions of how challenging their life is, and describing these changes as like them having no idea, makes this so much more impactful when you think about the climate change on top of the brutal life, and the fact that they have no idea why these things are changing. They just are, and that's terrifying and really scary for them. So I've found that way of talking about climate change made it so much more impactful to me. You're really with these animals, and you feel their confusion and their fear over what is happening around them. I found this book absolutely fascinating. It was quite a devastating and hard read. Like, it was really challenging to get through because it was just so upsetting. But I think it's such an important read, and it's definitely left an impact on me. Like, I still think about this book a lot. And yeah, even though it was so weird at first, I absolutely ended up loving this book. I felt it was really impactful. I think the way they talked about climate was really well done, and definitely made me think about it more, because I was experiencing it like EA and the other animals were, and seeing really how it impacted on their lives and how terrifying these changes were for them. I think the way they described it was just really well done. Like I said, I don't want to talk about the other perspectives in this book, because I feel like it's better to just go in not knowing, like I've already said. But what I will say is that it definitely helped with the pacing of this book. I think if this book was just EA's perspective, I would find the pacing really slow, and I think it would drag a lot. So I think having the three perspectives, the main one and then the two other ones to break up EA's main perspective, really helped with the pacing of this book, and really helped to keep my attention, because yeah, I would definitely say the pace is quite slow of this book. It's not really action-packed. I mean, some major things happen, but you're following a dolphin, right? So like, the pace is not going to be great. So yeah, I think that the pacing was really good because of those two other perspectives that really kept my interest. But those other perspectives were like almost even more devastating than EA's perspective. The whale and the male dolphin, they were really hard to read as well. So this book was just devastating. I love this book, even though it's weird and I was really reluctant to go in. Like I said, I still think about this book. It definitely left an impact on me. Definitely one of the more interesting things I've ever read. Especially if you're interested in climate fiction and haven't read this, please read this. Even if you're not typically a climate fiction reader, I think this is a great eye-opening way to bring attention to climate change and the impact that it is happening on the animal kingdom. So yeah, this was a really interesting read. Next two books I want to talk about are short stories, so I'm not going to talk about them in a lot of depth because then I will have spoiled the whole thing. I say short stories. So the first one I want to talk about is Emergency Skin by N.K. Jemisin. This is a short story from the author of the Broken Earth trilogy, you know, the 5th season books, which I still need to read. I tried reading it, but like it takes a lot of brain energy. So anyway, this is a dystopian short story. I will tell you the plot. So the plot is your typical dystopian. Man has fucked the planet to a level where it is no longer livable. And yep, just sucked it dry, climate change, all that stuff. So long ago, humanity left Earth to go find another planet to destroy and live on. They didn't destroy it in the book, I'm just, you know what I mean. So they left behind Earth, and they took what they say the most beautiful and left with the most beautiful of humanity, and left those behind that are quote unquote unable to contribute to society. So now we follow an explorer a long time, centuries later, who is sent back to Earth to see what Earth looks like now and gather like samples like we would from, you know, Mars or whatever. So yeah, and that's all I'll say about the plot because any more is a massive spoiler. The kind of main highlights and topics this book cover are obviously climate change. It's obviously a climate story about how we treat our planet, if that wasn't obvious by the plot. It's also kind of a comment on like capitalism, our society, the things that we place value on in a capitalist system, and going back to the blurb that talked about like those who can contribute to society, and yeah, how we weigh those contributions and what contributions we see as important and not important. Obviously a big commentary also on the 1% and the wealth gap under the kind of capitalist system that we have. Going back to Worth, it's also what I think is a commentary on disabilities and how we treat people with disabilities in our society. Specifically talking about, I think, about people with physical disabilities, well, disabilities in general, but there is kind of a physical disability element that they talk about. And our prejudiced views on how people with disabilities contribute to the functioning of a society or don't contribute. Obviously I don't believe that, but that's kind of what it's commenting on. And I feel like that's all I can say. Like that's all I can say without spoiling the major plot of this book. But I found that commentary really eye-opening. It's a little bit upsetting to read and listen to, but it is very eye-opening about how we have these prejudiced views against people and what we see as helping society grow and being, I guess, a productive member of society under the system that we have. I really want to expand on those thoughts, but that just, I was going to, but then I was like, that just spoils the whole book. So that's all I'll say. But I think this short story novella is absolutely fantastic. I think it really got me thinking. I think it was done in such a clever way. And yeah, I liked the big focus on, yeah, how the 1% really control how we function. And I liked the commentary on, yeah, looking at our prejudices against yeah, people with disabilities and what's seen as a productive contribution to society in terms of like work and that kind of stuff. So I found this really eye-opening. I found it was absolutely fantastic, and I please if you do read this book, listen to it as an audio, because I listened to it as an audio. It's like an hour or something. It's absolutely fantastic on audio, and I feel like if you are going to read it, audio is the way to go. The other short story slash novella, whatever you want to call it, I want to recommend is The Six Deaths of the Saint by Alexi Harrow. This is a book in a collection called the Intershadow collection, which is I think maybe like 3, 4, 5, I can't remember exactly how many, I haven't read them all, short stories by different authors. So this is a fantasy short story. We follow a servant girl whose life is saved by the Saint of War, and he saves her life so she can fulfill her destiny to become like one of the greatest warriors that has ever lived, and she becomes a warrior fighting in the name of this prince. And then I'll just read the end of the blurb because it says it better than I ever will. So yeah, so she becomes a warrior for this prince, but the war never ends and the cost keeps rising. How many times will she repeat her own story? I'll only talk quickly about this book because, again, I'm going to spoil the whole thing if I give my full thoughts. But, so, this book is incredible. I think it's something like 30 pages, so very, very short. But what this author has managed to do in such a short amount of page count is crazy. The writing of this book is absolutely devastating and absolutely beautiful. The fact that I felt such a strong emotional connection to this character in such a short amount of time just like blew me away. Like I was sobbing for this character, and I barely know them, you know, like it's been 30 pages. I felt more emotional connection to a character that I've only read for 30 pages compared to some characters I read about in 300, 400 page books. So the fact that I was, in such little time and such little word count, I felt so emotionally devastated and so emotionally attached to this character is incredible. Like, incredible. I also want to recommend that you listen to this in audio as well. Because that's how I consumed it, and I thought the audiobook was amazing. Yeah, absolutely amazing. It's read by Saskia Malaved, and I think she did a fantastic job. It's beautiful, it's devastating, and I loved it. Writing is absolutely stunning. This next one's going to be really brief, but it's more like the less I say about this book, the better. It's another one where you do need to go in blindish to enjoy this book, I think. So this is Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister. I know she's written quite a few books, and I definitely want to read more of her stuff after reading this. This is a thriller. This follows this mum called Jen, and Jen one night is waiting for her son to come home from a night out clubbing. And yeah, she's just anxiously waiting to know that he's home and he's safe, you know. And she's waiting, and finally she's like, oh my god, thank god he's home, like he's safe, he's in one piece. And she sees him like walking up the driveway, eating a kebab, you know, typical. And then she sees like this man behind her son, and she's like, oh my god, there's like someone following my son. And then lo and behold, her son like turns around and stabs and kills the man. So it's all crazy. Like her son's obviously taken into police custody because he's just murdered someone, right? And the mum is like in shock, like, what just happened? What do we do? Like, yeah, so this is at night time, so her son's taken into police custody. She goes home and she's like, goes to bed because it's like some crazy hour in the morning. And then the next morning she wakes up and it's the day before. It's the day before the stabbing. So this book is like the time loop trope, which I feel like can be really hit or miss for me. Like I either love it or I hate it. It's not, yeah, I've read a few books where I'm like, I hate the time loop in this, I hate it. But when it's done well, I can enjoy it. So this was a little bit surprising. I enjoyed this because I've had books where I just have not enjoyed the time loop aspect of it. But yeah, this is a time loop story where each day Jen wakes up and it is the day before. So Jen has to kind of live her life backwards and figure out what happened to lead up to her son stabbing someone. I think this was a really unique thriller. I love the twists and turns. There was lots of twists and turns in this book, and I loved the kind of frustrating nature of this book because, you know, every day Jen woke up and kind of had to start again in a way. It was the day before, and as the book goes on, this is not really a spoiler, the gaps in time can change and she finds herself further and further and it's almost like, will she just get lost back in time? So I thought this was really unique. That is all I'm going to say about this book, because just enjoy it for yourself. But I thought the twists and turns were great. I was really shocked by some of the the plot twists in this book shocked me, and I didn't see a lot of it coming, so you know, that's always a good thing in a thriller. My next recommendation is a thriller, an Australian thriller actually. This is Jane Harper, an Australian author, if you're not Australian and didn't know, and this is her book The Lost Man, and it's definitely my favourite of her books that I've read so far, which is crazy to me because I read The Dry by her, which is the first book in the Dry series. No, it's not called the Dry series, it's called the Aaron Falk series, sorry. And I didn't think I would ever love a book more than that one, but then this book came along and I was like, never mind, this is now my favourite of her books. It's absolutely great. So like I said, this is a thriller. This is set in rural Queensland. This is set on cattle properties. We follow these brothers that own cattle property, and one day one of the brothers, there's like originally three, one of the brothers, spoiler, I just said originally three, is dead. And they find him dead at this kind of landmark that is known, what's it called? Yeah, called, why can't I see it? Stockman's Grave. I just forgot how to read for a second there. It's called Stockman's Grave. And they don't know whether the brother took his own life or something more sinister occurred for him to wind up dead. So what I love about Jane Harper's writing, especially in The Lost Man, is how absolutely atmospheric all of her books are. The writing is just beautiful and so atmospheric. What I think helped make it even more atmospheric in this book is I listened to this on audio. I think this is the first time I've read a Jane Harper. Well, I've listened to a Jane Harper, I should say. I think I physically read the other books of hers so far, but I just happened to pick this one up on audio and loved the narrator. So after the end of the audiobook, there was an interview between, I think it was, I can't remember who was interviewing them. It's probably someone that works for Macmillan, the publishing house, but yeah, I think it was someone that worked for Macmillan, Jane Harper, the author, and the guy that did the audio, which I tried to Google but I couldn't find. Yeah, so and the narrator, and Jane Harper was talking about the setting of this book, and she said that she actually went and stayed on cattle property in Australia, in Queensland, as research for this book. And she said, yeah, she stayed for like, I can't remember how long, a period of time on these cattle properties, and she interviewed and spoke to these cattle property owners and said, what would your response to this situation be? Like, how would you handle this? Etc, etc. So she interviewed them and gathered all of the knowledge of this kind of setting of cattle properties that she could get. So I just feel like, yeah, her research really paid off, because I find these books and the atmosphere so rich and so atmospheric that I'm so enthralled in the setting and really feel myself being on these cattle properties and really absorbed into the setting of this book. I should mention as well, there is sexual assault mentioned in this book. It's not explicit. Please don't quote me on this, because it's a while ago I read this. If I remember correctly, it's not descriptive in any way, but it is mentioned a lot, so just a warning. I obviously loved the thriller aspect of this book, and I was quite surprised and did not see the ending coming, so I think if I'm recommending you a thriller, it's obvious that I loved the thriller twists and turns of this book, like I said in my other thriller recommendations. What I also loved about this book was, I guess what made it a little bit different from other thrillers is that you stay with the family throughout this whole story. You read from the perspective of a grieving family dealing with this loss and learning all of these things about the family member. And yeah, it's quite devastating and hard to read, because you are with this family that is grieving and in mourning, while still dealing with the everyday work of owning cattle property. Wow, I can't speak. I've been filming this for a while. So yeah, so it's really devastating because you're with this mourning family, and I think that was written really well. And yeah, it's not just about the thriller aspect, but it's also really about the dynamics of the family, and how they're all dealing with the grief and dealing with trying to figure out what happened to their loved one, what could have led to such a thing happening. And I was a little bit concerned when they started to talk about sexual assault in this book, because the men in this family are kind of like, I don't want to say stereotypical, but for older generation Australian men, you know, and even not that old, how they talk about consent and women and, you know, that toxic masculinity that they would have grown up with. I was unsure how these characters would handle those kind of topics, but I think that it was really, really well done. What I liked about this book as well, which made it a little bit unique, I guess, for me, is that you spend so much time with the grieving family. Of course, the thriller and the finding out what happened to the brother is a main plot of this book, but what is also a main plot of this book is spending time with this grieving family, which is quite devastating at parts, and quite hard to read. But yeah, you spend time with this family dealing and grieving with the loss of this loved one, how they handle that, on top of, you know, continuing on with life as everyone has to do, and the work of owning cattle property. But yeah, it's also really about the dynamics of this family, and such an interesting family dynamic, that it was just fascinating to read, even though the pace is a lot slower and sometimes the thriller plot can take a back step. And like, that's not what I mean to say. Like, sometimes it's not the main focus of the book, these characters really are. I found it really interesting, and I liked how they dealt with certain topics in this book. I think that the assault conversation was handled really well, and spoken about really well. So yeah, this book is just, all I can say to describe this book is so atmospheric, so moving, really shocking. Please read Jane Harper, especially this book, it's so good. The final book I'm going to talk about is The Night Swim by Megan Golden. This is yet another book that I would really recommend that you audiobook it, because that's how I listen to it, and you'll see why in a second. So this is a thriller, and this is kind of mixed media. So there is a podcast element to this book, hence why I think it's great to listen to it as an audiobook, plus the narrators are just great. So like I said, thriller. We follow a quite a famous podcaster called Rachel, and Rachel's newest season of her true crime podcast is following this rape trial in this small town where this kind of golden boy of the town is accused of raping the police chief's daughter. So her podcast is going to follow this trial live. She's going to this small town to watch this trial unfold. And like I said, Rachel is quite famous. Her podcast is like one of the biggest true crime podcasts, but she's kind of managed to keep her identity other than her voice a secret, private. But while she's driving down to this small town to cover the case, she finds a letter on her windshield, and it's from this woman who is from this small town that she's heading to, and is kind of begging her to look into the death of her sister that occurred in this same small town as the rape trial over 20 years ago. And that's really shocking, because Rachel's like, how the hell does this woman like know who I am? Like, I've kept my life pretty private. But yeah, the sister wants Rachel to look into this investigation on her podcast and bring it to light. The official death of this woman is listed as a drowning, but the sister believes that it was murder. So this book follows both the rape trial and the investigation into the alleged drowning of this woman more than 20 years ago. So I obviously loved the mixed media element of this book. I'm a big fan of mixed media in my books, and I felt that, yeah, there were some chapters that you were just literally listening to the podcast, which I love. I think that that was really well done and kept this book really engaging. What I also think made me love this book was the pacing. Like, I felt like it was perfect, like a perfect balance of the rape trial and the looking into the drowning. Like, I felt like it was just the perfect balance, that I was so, like, I was just zooming through this audiobook because I was so engrossed in both stories, and I feel like the pacing was really well because yeah, there was two interesting stories happening at the same time, and because you keep going back and forth between the two, you just want to keep listening because, you know, each perspective, you know, for example, like the rape trial, there'd be some breakthrough and then it would skip to the sister investigation, so you would just want to keep listening to find out what happened to both stories. And I like the connection between the stories. I think that was really clever and really well done, and it obviously covers the topic of assault really well, and I guess how it can be well, how it's viewed in the media, the whole he said, she said argument. The commentary was well done on the rape trial. I found that was really good reflection of real life, and not good, that doesn't sound the right word, realistic reflection of how these kind of trials go in real life, especially when the accused is very well known, wealthy, very connected. So I found that that was handled really well. I think the writing in this book is just like, is absolutely beautiful. I absolutely loved this book. It was a hard read, but it was beautiful, really well done, and like I said, perfect balance between both stories. I don't feel like one overtook the other. I just feel like it was like really perfectly balanced. So yeah, please read this book, but be warned, there is obviously discussions of assault and rape in this book, so if that's something that might trigger up, upset you, it is throughout this whole book, so I would not recommend. But if, you know, that's not a trigger for you, please do listen to this book and listen to it on audio because the audio is fantastic. So those are my 7 recommendations, books that I just feel like I haven't highlighted enough on this channel and wanted to talk about and gush to you guys about. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed these recommendations. Let me know in the comments, like, have you read any of these books that I've talked about, or what are some books that you feel like you just don't recommend enough to people? I could always do with more recommendations, so let me know. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and give this video a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you would like to see more of my content, and I will see you in whatever the hell I post next. Bye!